If you're a Steelers fan wondering how can you expect Diontae Johnson, Pat Freiermuth, and other Steelers major targets to improve their numbers in 2022 with Ben Roethlisberger gone, I've got some interesting answers here. Looking at some stats, bringing out some comparisons across the league. We're going to have an interesting discussion here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things in the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, and YouTube. If you're watching this video on YouTube, hit the like button in this video if you enjoyed it. Hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus episodes whenever we have breaking news content. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline.net. BetOnline has you covered all season long with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline, where the game starts. We hope everyone had a great weekend. I did. I celebrated my friend Sid and Rumman's wedding. It was a wonderful ceremony in downtown Pittsburgh. So congratulations to them. And if there's anyone who went there who's watching it, I'm glad I got to party with you. But I wanted to dip into something that I touched on with my latest Carter's Classroom piece on SteelersNow.com. And that piece went up Friday before the weekend started, saying Steelers must give Freiermuth deeper targets. Now, sounds like a simple concept, but I wanted to illustrate with that article how important it is that Pat Freiermuth isn't just getting the kind of targets that he got for most of the season. Over 75% of his targets from Ben Roethlisberger in 2021 as a rookie for Pat Freiermuth came at short distance or behind the line of scrimmage. That's not what you want. You want to be able to get a guy who's athletic like him, who can stretch the field a little bit, has speed, can go up and get the ball, wins combat catches. You want him to get more deep opportunities. And again, you might think, okay, yeah, Chris, duh. But here's a big part of this is that if you're thinking that you understood where he, and I'd also throw in Deontay Johnson in this mix, where their limits are at. I think that you're missing the point of where these guys could take the offense, not just by purely their stats, but what threats they force the defense to honor. I often talk about this. The best way to attack a defense is to force them to have to think about several different things all at the same time. The best offenses are ones that don't just have one great weapon. They may have a leading superstar, but they have to have other weapons around the field. Otherwise, a good defense can lock down one person and say, beat us with these other guys that we're not scared of. The Steelers do have the potential to have that kind of a balanced offense. I've done several episodes about how that's going to be a serious challenge for Matt Canada. But this is a year that you have to see these numbers kind of take a step up when you're looking at average depth of targets. And if you don't know what that means or what that is, you go on Pro Football Focus, look up their statistics, and the average depth of target is just the average distance they were when they were targeted, from when the ball was thrown. So, if a player's 5 yards, beyond the line of scrimmage, that tallies into it versus, 20 yards, that tallies into that average as well. Now, Pat Freiermuth, this is a guy who, according to Pro Football Focus, only got one target, all season long beyond 20 yards. That means he only had one deep ball, and that's tough for it. That's why it's impressive for this guy to have 7 touchdowns on the season, and over, and the yards that he was able to put together and the success that he brought to the Steelers, because there were quite a few games where if he doesn't contribute what he did in those games, especially the first Browns game and the Bears game, the Steelers probably lose those games. So it's remarkable that he did what he did with those. But I think that one thing that's being overlooked is the impact that can be had. Now, there's another guy, Mark Andrews, in the same division, plays for the Ravens. Not a superstar tight end, but a very good one, and one that teams do respect when they play the Ravens. This guy had 9 touchdowns on the season, and had Lamar Jackson had over 1,000 yards, was able to do damage with him. But he also had 21 deep targets on the season, catching 9. This isn't to say that they got to throw to Pat Freiermuth every time deep over the middle, or once a drive, or even 5 times a game. This is just saying, hey, maybe once a game, have a shot play like that designed up that's going to be that can keep a defense on guard. And if you hit it eight times in a season, imagine the damage that does to the defense's psyche. Imagine the things they have to think about, because one thing we've talked about a lot is that if this offense is going to primarily run through the ground game and playing off of the ground game, but part of playing off of the ground game is hitting these type of shot plays, these type of opportunities where you have these athletic type of players, and hitting your tight end deep down the middle part of the field is part of that. And again, you're talking about Lamar Jackson. Mark Andrews and Lamar Jackson, they have a great connection, but as I'm a person who often talks about how good Lamar Jackson is, you're talking about him with his deep accuracy. That's one of the things that you start to get concerns about with Lamar Jackson. If you're talking about Mr. Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, you're hoping, hey, just be as good as that. If you could just have that kind of deep ball accuracy, if you could just be the guy who is able to connect with these guys a little under half the time, it's going to do so much more for the offense. And I think it's interesting to compare Mitchell Trubisky's 2019 season, not 2020 because he didn't throw as much, for other reasons, but compare his 2019 numbers to Ben Roethlisberger's 2021 numbers as far as the breakdowns of how far they threw down the field. And you look at it, only 10.9% of Ben Roethlisberger's passing attempts were targeting 20 yards or further down the field in 2021. In 2019 for Mitch Trubisky, and again, we're going with Mitch Trubisky because I presume he's going to be the starting quarterback over Kenny Pickett. I've talked about this a lot. I think he's just going to have the experience. It's going to be a lot for Kenny to work his way up. Kenny's here to work his way up the depth chart, maybe earn the number 2 spot. If he doesn't, just learn. Even if he does or he doesn't do that, learn this year. Be ready for next year's camp and see what moves you make there. But with Mitch Trubisky, he to compare it to Ben Roethlisberger's 10.9%, he had a 12.4%. And they may say, well, that's only like about a 1.5%, Chris. Yes, but that difference also changes the inflection of what defenses have to honor. When it came to medium passes, he threw 20.9% of his passes were in the medium range, whereas for Ben Roethlisberger it was 17.4. And this is where I think you see a bigger jump here, is when you combine the percentage of passes that made up Mitch Trubisky's short passes, which go from 0 to 9 yards, or passes that went behind the line of scrimmage. When you combine that percentage, it gets up to about 61%. You combine Ben Roethlisberger's percentages of how much of the short passes and behind the line of scrimmage passes made up of his total passing, it was over 68%. So you're talking about a 7% difference over hundreds and hundreds of passes. That shows that, hey, teams are going to sit on them. And we even saw it. It was what happened in the late 2020 season when the Steelers started 11-0 until teams realized, oh, wait a minute, Ben Roethlisberger's mainly just throwing short. He doesn't have the cannon that he used to that we always had to worry about. And that kind of forced Ben Roethlisberger to kind of have to live with where he was because of his arm limitations. This is going to open up a lot of different opportunities for Pat Freiermuth. And as I said, it's also going to do the same for Deontay Johnson, who I've said since he was drafted in 2019, I'm not sure if we've had a chance to see a full complement of Deontay Johnson. I still think that him and James Washington were very unfortunate as far as when they got to the Steelers in the Ben Roethlisberger era, because they did get there for the end of it. But if they had come maybe when Mike Wallace and Emmanuel Sanders and those guys were coming around, maybe their careers go a bit differently. But I want to look at Deontay Johnson's numbers in comparison to some other things even closer. We're going to start comparing a few more numbers across the NFL because we want to take a bigger picture look as far as like, hey, take your mind, Steelers fans, out of where you thought this team was supposed to be and understand you're going to have to look around the league because Ben Roethlisberger ain't there anymore, which means this is going to be a different offense one way or the other. We'll do that in just a second here. But first, I got to talk to you guys about betonline.net. Betonline.net is your number one source for all your betting stats and sports information. Find all the latest sports developments, league reviews, and news, including all the things that are happening with Major League Baseball. You want to get into MLB? This is a great way to do it. You go to betonline.net. You learn about all the odds, all the all the bets that you can make money on while you're waiting for football season to come back around. Baseball's fun. If you put money on it, it's even more fun. And the best way to learn how to put money on it is to go to betonline.net, your continued source for all your sports wagering information from live betting, playoffs, esports, and more. Head to the website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends in the action when you visit BetOnline, where the game starts. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're keeping it rolling here on a Monday episode. I also want to point out that training camp is less than 2 weeks away. It starts the players report on July 26th, so we're less than 10 days away now, in fact. So it's getting even closer for us to start talking about how guys are looking when the pads go on. So that's going to be really exciting. But I still want to talk about, how guys have looked when the pad's been on in years past, and I'm going to switch to Deontay Johnson for a bit. Now, it's important to note that Deontay Johnson in his career has done okay for himself. He's made a name for himself. There are people who do think, hey, this guy does have potential. I do think if he went out into the NFL in the free agency market, he wouldn't get big money, but I think he'd get decent money. But there's a chance that after this season, he does get big money, and I think a lot of it's going to be the same thing for Pat Freiermuth. Does he get a significant boost in where his targets come from, how many targets of him get to be deep balls, how many get to be more medium routes that are beyond the sticks, beyond just 10 yards out there to get the first down. If you want to look back at how it was for him last year, in 2021, 15.9% of his targets were deep, which means 20 yards or more. He caught 8 of those 28 targets for 4 touchdowns. So I mean, he was a deep threat at times, but I want to compare that to something else in a second here that's going to show you something. But to go through the rest of his numbers, 19.9% of his targets were considered medium routes. And then you look at short passes and passes behind the line of scrimmage, they compiled over 64% of his targets. And with Deontay Johnson's ability to separate from defenders, you can probably think for yourself and say, okay, there's a better way to use him. If you can unlock those deeper options, even though it's just those more intermediate, those medium options, what does that do? Well, let's look at a guy who has gotten paid, and that's Terry McLaurin. And Terry McLaurin, he hasn't had nothing special at quarterback in Washington lately. It's just been working with whoever they give him, and he'll have Carson Wentz this year, and we'll talk about that in the final segment, looking at again around the league. But let's compare 2021 stats for Terry McLaurin when it comes to how much of his targets were deep, medium, or short. 26.2% of McLaurin's targets were considered deep passes. 29.4% were considered medium passes. That means over 50% of his targets were beyond 10 yards this past season. That's ridiculous. That's a complete jump, and it's not ridiculous. Excuse me. It's ridiculous when you see how big the difference is between Deontay Johnson and Terry McLaurin. Deontay Johnson didn't even make 36% of his targets being beyond 10 yards beyond the line of scrimmage from Ben Roethlisberger last year, and Mason Rudolph, because there was a game of Mason Rudolph. But Terry McLaurin, with average to subpar quarterback play, was able to get that kind of distribution of his targets. And you see Terry McLaurin. Now, Terry McLaurin also, I think, is one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL. And I think if Deontay Johnson had a younger quarterback, maybe he gets these opportunities and we get to see what these guys are. But I want to remind you, Deontay Johnson, when he was drafted in 2019, he was drafted to a team that thought they were going to have the 2018 version of Ben Roethlisberger all over again, when he led the team in touchdowns, led the league in touchdowns, and also led the league in interceptions. But they thought, hey, we got the quarterback, the gunslinger back, we're going to be working with him. And then he was out for the season. And then they had Mason Rudolph, and then he was knocked out. And then he had to deal with Devin Hodges. So Deontay Johnson's first year in the league, he was a 3rd round pick playing for a team that was going with 2nd and 4th string quarterbacks. And then in 2020 and 2021, he had the version of Ben Roethlisberger that was dinking and dunking a lot more than airing it out the way that we saw Ben Roethlisberger air it out for decades with the Pittsburgh Steelers. But again, you look at what he's been able to bring so far. Again, last year, top 10 in receiving yards, top 6 in receptions, top 6 in receptions that gained first downs. To me, that is impressive. And I still say, I'm not saying that they should pay him anything he's asking for, $23 million or anything like that a year. But I am saying that if Deontay Johnson is given an opportunity from Mitch Trubisky, who again, we looked over those numbers in the previous segment, talking about him and Ben Roethlisberger and how the proportions of the deep passes and intermediate passes were a decent boost from Trubisky over Roethlisberger. If he just gets that simple of a boost, maybe it does unlock some parts of Deontay Johnson that we haven't been able to see. You think about all the times that Deontay Johnson's had drops. They haven't been just on deep ball. They've been, when he's getting a high concentration of targets. And I think he had the second most targets of receivers in the NFL. Imagine if he's able to get a similar amount of yards on a lot less targets because they're just simply further down the field. Then you're probably decreasing the amount of chances that he has to have the drops that he did last season. And again, he did better with the drops. For all the people that are out there saying, well, the Steelers should go get a Deebo Samuel or something like that, Deontay Johnson had a lower drop rate and less drops than a lot of the superstar wide receivers out there, including Jamar Chase, Tyreek Hill, Deebo Samuel, all the guys that people talk about all week in and week out on ESPN or on the national shows when they're talking about who the top wide receivers are in the league. He did better than when it comes to his drop percentage. And I think some of that can increase even more this year, one with his own practice, and he does need to improve on those and step up in certain situations, but also by giving him more chances to make plays further downfield and not having him to make 4 catches to gain 20 yards, instead make 1 catch to make 20 yards. And again, I'm not promising that just by simply targeting the ball down the field that everything's going to change for the Steelers and everything's going to be hunky-dory and perfect and the Steelers are going to go 17-0. No, that's not what we're talking about here. What we are talking about is the fact that when you look at a lot of these guys who are similar in skill sets, whether it's the wide receivers or the tight ends, guys that you can compare and say, hey, there's similarities in how they get separation and how these guys fight in certain matchups. That when they get further targets downfield, it's just naturally it's better. It's one thing that people talk about with quarterbacks, how yards per attempt. They want to see you throwing the ball further down the field, or at least showing that, hey, your passes are more effective. And gaining more yards, because the more times you have to pass, if you're efficient, great, but it gives the defense that many more chances to jump on you. But if you're able to make those big plays, give those opportunities for your players to make big plays, it opens things up for your offense. And again, we're talking about Deontay Johnson, and we're not even getting to Chase Claypool. I think in his third year, he has to prove who he wants to be if he wants to be one of the top receivers in the NFL. We've talked about that on the show. We're not even talking about George Pickens and Calvin Austin because they're rookies. They're going to be figuring out who they are in the NFL. But we're just talking about Pat Freiermuth and Deontay Johnson, who are the presumed number 1 guys at each of their positions going into this NFL season. They're going to be the guys that I think get the first crack at it, get the first bite at the apple for what deeper targets mean for the Pittsburgh Steelers when you look at the average depth of targets on this team, whether it is Mitch Trubisky or Kenny Pickett or anyone else who's throwing the ball. They're younger. They're going to get the ball further down the field, and this is going to open up the offense. And again, I think if that happens, and it has to be successful, they can't just be chucking up bombs that go nowhere. It can't just be like, you're connecting on 1% of these passes, then it is a waste of time. But again, if they're able to just do that at a decent clip, just better than what they were last year, it forces those linebackers and those safeties that last year were crowding the line of scrimmage. And even before last year, when the Steelers had James Conner, teams started to crowd the line of scrimmage and say, you're not going to beat us. And especially with Najee Harris, there's like, we're not letting you beat us. If someone's going to beat us, it's going to be these guys, because we know that you guys don't like to throw deep. But if you at least show the defense, hey, we can do this, this is possible, then I do think there's going to be a balance where you're starting to force those linebackers and safeties to think. They can't just run up and crush the inside the box. They can't go up in the 5-yard zone when it is a handoff. They might have to hesitate because this might be play action. Play action probably is going to get called a lot more this next year. It just hasn't been something that they've used when Ben Roethlisberger has been at quarterback for the past several years. I do think that there's going to be a different balance to how this offense works, and some of it is going to be simply about getting the ball further down the field, giving these guys more opportunities to make plays. And when they make plays, they're for 20, 25, 30, 40, 40 yards. And also, we saw Pat Freiermuth, he forced 11 missed tackles. That's up there, I think, in the top 10 as far as tight ends that forced missed tackles in the NFL last year. Of those, imagine if some of those are further down the field. Again, he didn't catch a single pass. He got 1 target all year long beyond 20 yards beyond the line of scrimmage. Imagine if those are for even bigger plays, when he's picked up momentum and he's running at full speed and the defender misses him, and that defender isn't the linebacker that's 3 yards off the ball or off the line of scrimmage. It's the safety who was the last protection of the end zone for the defense. You get my point here. There's more opportunities for big plays. And the same thing goes for Deontay Johnson. And when that starts to happen for one guy, it starts to spread the wealth around, because then defenses have to honor all those different threats. And then again, when the deep ball, even if the deep ball isn't, I'm not talking about having the 10th best deep passing game in the NFL. Just get it back to the middle part of the league where you're just teams know that is part of your arsenal. That alone will open up the run game. I'm telling you, if that happens, you're going to remember this episode and you're going to say, that did happen. We talked about a few of those things last year that could or should happen, and whether something did happen. If it didn't happen, that tells a lot about where the season goes. And for the offense, you have to see these average depth of targets go up. And I think you will. And that'll lead to why I think the Steelers offense will be better in 2022 than it was in 2021. We're going to take another quick break. When we come back, I want to look around the league for a sec because we got a caller who asked a question, not just about the Steelers, but about the standing of a Steeler with other players at his position around the league. I want to answer that question in just a second here. But first, I got to talk to you guys about Dave. If you're living paycheck to paycheck or struggling to make ends meet, it can be really stressful when unexpected expenses come up. Now, Dave can help you get out of a pinch when you really need it. Dave is the banking app that can help you get up to $500 instantly with extra cash. That's more money to fill your tank, buy a wedding gift, catch up on bills, all the different things that you need to tackle those expenses that have been stressing you out without any hangups. And there's no interest and no credit check needed. Millions of people have downloaded the Dave app to get financial relief they need with extra cash. So if you're in a pinch and you need some extra help, download Dave right now and think of it as a helping hand from future you. Download the Dave app from the App Store right now. That's D-A-V-E, Dave. Sign up for extra cash account and get up to $500 instantly. For terms and conditions, go to dave.com/legal. That's dave.com/legal. Instant transfer fees apply. Banking provided by Evolve. Member FDIC. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter. We're wrapping up the show today with one more segment. I'm going to stick to the receiving end. We've talked about tight ends and wide receivers and average depth of targets. This caller is a caller who's called in before. Nathan Glass of Los Angeles asked an interesting question when it comes to the 2019 wide receiver class. Here's Nathan.
Hey, Chris, it's Nathan Glass from California again. My question is the 2019 wide receiving core throughout the league all have new quarterbacks this season. We have, you have Deontay Johnson has a new quarterback, Terry McLaurin has a new quarterback, DK Metcalf has a new quarterback, Deebo Samuel has a new quarterback, and A.J. Brown has a new quarterback. The question I have for you is, out of all those receivers, who do you think will have the biggest season with their new quarterback? Thanks for taking my question. Love the show. Absolutely love the show. And keep up the good work, man. You're going places. And hope to hear from you soon.
Nathan, thank you very much for your question. We always appreciate anyone who calls in. Remember, if you're a caller or you're a listener who wants to get your question on the air, call 412-223-6644. Leave a voicemail with your name and where you're from and keep your question to under a minute. That really does help us here on the editing side of things. You can also, if you're international, you can't call that number, LO Steelers topicbag@gmail.com, because we do have a lot of Steelers fans all over the place. Steelers Nation, Steelers Country, Steelers Continent, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of y'all out there, more than y'all think. Anyways, let's get to Nathan's question here, because this is a good question about the status of a lot of these 2019 wide receivers, which is an interesting class, and it does pose a serious situation with how these guys are making money, because A.J. Brown got traded to the Eagles this last year, so he'll be with Jalen Hurts, and he got paid when he got traded to the Eagles. Terry McLaurin, he signed a big deal. Deebo Samuel still looking to sign his big deal. DK Metcalf, he's with the Seahawks. They don't got Russell Wilson no more. They're wondering what they're going to do there. And Deontay Johnson, of course, he's in Pittsburgh, where Ben Roethlisberger has now retired. Terry McLaurin, he had Tyler Heineke, and now he's got Carson Wentz. We'll see how that goes. You're gonna have a new quarterback. Jimmy Garoppolo is not the starting quarterback for the San Francisco 49ers. So yeah, everybody's got these new quarterbacks, and everyone does have good names for themselves. They do different things very well. But some of you may be thinking I'm here to just say, oh yeah, it's going to be Deontay Johnson because the Steelers are going to give him deeper targets. No, I actually think it's going to be A.J. Brown. A.J. Brown is a guy who, when I see him, he reminds me of like the prototypical wide receiver one with the height, the speed, the hands, the physicality. He has all the components that you want to be your star receiver. And not that these other guys don't have the components as well, because Antonio Brown wasn't that build. He was smaller. He was a lot closer to Deante Johnson and Terry McLaurin. and he was the best receiver in football for 6 years. So, that's that's neither here nor there. But just the way that he's built and the stuff I saw him do with Tennessee, I think with what the Eagles are building, I think they're going to be a more balanced offense. I think Jalen Hurts has gotten more comfortable in that offense. And I think that where he's going, I think he's going to be able to balance off that offense with Miles Sanders and the different weapons that they have. They got Devontae Smith. They're going to be a wide receiver 1-2 punch that I think people have to respect. And I just think that with the way things click in Philly, he might be the guy that blows up the most. Terry McLaurin did also sign a big contract, but I also think that Carson Wentz, I'm just not on the Carson Wentz bandwagon anymore. I used to think that this guy could turn up. I even thought that he was going to make the Colts a dark horse to make the playoffs and maybe even make some upsets happen in the playoffs last year. But it was the Colts losing to the Jaguars that got the Steelers that really helped the Steelers get into the playoffs in Week 17 last year. So Carson Wentz, he kind of proved me wrong about him there, and I think Terry will still be fine. I think he'll still put up good numbers and be a dangerous threat that everyone has to honor. I just don't think he has the same kind of opportunity that AJ Brown has. Went out for Deebo Samuel. I think Deebo runs into a different problem. Now, Deebo Samuel, if you're familiar with the 49ers, he was used more like a running back and wide receiver, kind of like the way that Le'Veon Bell used to talk about in reverse. Like, hey, I'm not just a running back. I'm also a wide receiver. I do all these other things. Well, Deebo Samuel, that was what made him a real weapon for the 49ers, but he's openly said, I don't want to be that anymore. That lessens the years I have in the NFL, which means lessens the money I'm going to make in the NFL. So he wants to be more of a pure wide receiver, and if he's being used there, I think that's going to lessen his impact in the game. Deebo's a great athlete. He gets out on people. He makes people miss. He's strong. He's fast. But he has a much bigger drop problem than Deontay Johnson. And I've received this question several times. Why don't the Steelers trade Diontae Johnson for Deebo Samuel? Neither likes it where they're at, or they both want to get respected. And the Steelers, maybe they could pay Deebo Samuel. Deebo Samuel don't want to be used the way that he was most effective last year. And if you think that Deontay Johnson had a drops problem, go look at his numbers. Deebo Samuel's was the highest in the league when it comes to drop rates of wide receivers who got a decent amount of targets on the season. I think he had 12 drops compared to Deontay Johnson. That's by far the most in the league. Well, I wouldn't say by far. That Jamar Chase and there were a few other guys up there as well. But again, I just think that Deebo Samuel, with a new quarterback, a second-year quarterback, I don't think it's going to work out that way. I think he's going to be a dangerous threat. Make no mistake. I think he's still going to be a guy that produces highlights and someday does get paid to be that. But I think with his situation, you're asking a lot there. Whereas AJ Brown, I think Jalen Hurts, he's grown a bit in my eyes. I think he has the potential to be a more dynamic quarterback. I don't think he's a top 10 guy after this season that we'll see, but I do think he puts himself in the consideration of being like, hey, like he's a guy you got to respect, kind of like how Ryan Tannehill became for the Tennessee Titans. But I think that what you're going to see with this offense is that with him and Devontae Smith, it's going to be a more balanced passing attack with those two guys at the wide receiver position. Now back to Diontae. Can Diontae be this guy? Can he be the guy that kind of takes over the 2019 position and has the best new year with the best new quarterback? It's very possible. Mitch Trubisky, if he turns it on. My biggest problem with Mitch Trubisky is that he's coming into a new system. He had a year off. And again, we're presuming Trubisky to be the starter. I don't see Kenny. I'm a guy who supports Kenny Pickett in a lot of ways because in the way I think, because I covered him for 2 years in college at Pitt. I think that he was a phenomenal college quarterback. I think he can be a phenomenal NFL quarterback if he gets time to grow properly. But I don't think the Steelers are going to rush him, and it's going to be Mitch Trubisky. Now, that being said, I don't know if Mitch Trubisky gets Deontay Johnson the kind of opportunities that AJ Brown gets this upcoming season. Maybe he does. And maybe Deontay Johnson goes off. But I would actually put him number 2 of this list. And DK Metcalf, I like DK Metcalf a lot, but Drew Lock, Geno Smith, it's rough in Seattle. So that's not even about DK. It's just Metcalf, you're in a rough spot. But AJ Brown, Deontay Johnson, those could be the 2 2019 wide receivers that you're talking about there. Now it's funny because AJ Brown been paid. So he's just confirming why he's getting paid. If Deontay Johnson, if he makes this happen and he is the guy that kind of blows up from this year and does the best with his new quarterback, it's going to create some interesting contract questions with how the Steelers want to use him or pay him or not pay him in 2022 because they didn't sign an extension this year. They haven't signed. They probably won't sign one in training camp, and they have to sign one before the season begins. because that's just their policy. They don't operate otherwise. I could totally see Deontay Johnson having a really good year, people seeing what he could do with a few more deep targets and giving him, different opportunities to make plays with his skill set. And then all of a sudden, he says, you know what? I'm going to test the open market. I'm going to see if someone wants to give me the kind of deal that Terry McLaurin or A.J. Brown made. And the Steelers, maybe they want to give it to him. Maybe they do, but maybe they're like, you know what? We got other investments we want to make. We got George Pickens coming up. You got Chase Claypool. If the Steelers are thinking the way I think they're thinking, they're still trying to establish who that young core of offense is going to be built around. If Deontay Johnson is a pure number one wide receiver and they think he's top 5 in the NFL, I think they do find a way to keep him because they want to keep that kind of a talent around for whoever becomes the next franchise quarterback for the Pittsburgh Steelers. But if he's still, fringing on top 10, I don't think they pay out the money for that. I think they keep riding with their young guys. They draft another talented receiver in this upcoming draft class, and they keep a bunch of young dudes on the roster and see how that offensive group grows. Again, I think for the next few years, you're going to see this team be more of a rushing team than a passing team, which shows me there. So again, that's why I'm saying A.J. Brown just for this, but I would not be surprised to see Deontay Johnson there. Thanks again, Nathan, for your question. If you want to get your question in, again, call 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question to a minute or less, because that stuff really helps us with the editing side. Thanks again for checking out the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. This was the Monday episode. We'll be back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers. If you want to get more of this show, we're on Apple, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Odyssey, YouTube, all the platforms. Like this YouTube channel if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to like this YouTube video, if you enjoyed it. Subscribe to our YouTube channel to get all of our daily Monday through Friday episodes. And if you want to help us out even more, you can go to Apple Podcasts. You can go to Apple Podcasts, go rate us 5 stars with a positive comment. When you do both at the same time, you get a special shout out at the end of the show, because we do appreciate the people who give us those shout outs. Thanks again for checking out the show. We'll be back tomorrow with more on your Pittsburgh Steelers.